Welcome, restless souls, to Carman's Crypt. I'm Carman Carrion, keeper of forgotten tales and curator of nightmares. You've wandered into my domain, where each week I unearth a fresh horror from the depths of human imagination. In these darkened halls, stories wait like hungry shadows. Each tale we've collected whispers of terrors both ancient and new. From crumbling mansions where something skitters behind the walls, to that strange text message you received at 3 a.m. from a number that shouldn't exist. So gather close. The candles are lit, the shadows grow long, and the witching hour is upon us. Are you prepared to face what lurks in the darkest recesses of Carman's Crypt? Lock your doors, still your nerves, and remember, here, every fear comes alive. This is Carman's Crypt. Your sanctuary of scares awaits. Lily traced her fingers over the spare key hidden behind the loose brick in Jason's porch column. 2 years of memories flooded her mind as she stood in the darkness. She remembered the first time he had shown her this hiding spot, during their sophomore year when they had gotten caught in a thunderstorm after a movie date. They had run to his house, laughing and soaked to the bone, and he had retrieved this key with a flourish, declaring it was time she knew where it was just in case. That had been the night she first knew she loved him. They had sat on his back porch watching the lightning, wrapped in towels and drinking hot chocolate, talking until sunrise about their dreams, fears, and futures. Jason had told her about losing his mother to cancer when he was 12, and how he had decided to become an oncologist because of it. Lily had shared her own fears about following her passion for art instead of the practical business degree her parents wanted. Since then, there had been countless nights spent studying together in his room, with Lily sketching in her notebook while Jason memorized medical terminology. Movie marathons where they fell asleep on the couch, only to be awakened by his dad making pancakes the next morning. Holiday dinners where his family had welcomed her like she had always belonged there. Even his stepmom Linda treated her like a daughter, teaching her old family recipes and sharing embarrassing stories about Jason's childhood. Their relationship wasn't perfect. They had had their share of fights, like the big one last month when Jason had forgotten their anniversary because he was studying for finals. But they had always worked through their problems. That's why these past 3 weeks had been so hard. Jason had never been away this long before, and even though they texted constantly, it wasn't the same as having him here. Lily pulled out her phone and looked at their last exchange from earlier that day. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow," she had written. His response had been typically Jason, a string of heart emojis, followed by, "Not if I see you first." She smiled at the screen, imagining his face when he woke up to find her there. Taking a deep breath, Lily slipped the key into the lock. The familiar click reminded her of all the times she had let herself in before, always with Jason's knowledge and permission, of course. This was different, but she tried to quiet the small voice of doubt in her head. After all, what kind of girlfriend would she be if she didn't surprise her boyfriend when he came home early from a family trip? Lily's footsteps echoed softly against the wooden stairs as she made her way up to Jason's bedroom. The house was pitch black, except for the pale blue moonlight filtering through the windows, casting shadows across the walls. She knew she probably shouldn't be here. Sneaking into her boyfriend's house at 2 a.m. wasn't exactly girlfriend of the year behavior. But after 3 weeks apart, while he was supposedly visiting family, she couldn't wait until morning to surprise him. She had seen his car in the driveway when she pulled up, the silver Honda Civic gleaming under the streetlights. His parents were away at their lake house for the weekend, which made this the perfect opportunity. Lily had been planning this surprise for days, ever since Jason texted saying he was coming home early from visiting his mother's family. The third step from the top creaked. It always did, and Lily froze, her heart hammering in her chest. But the house remained silent, save for the soft hum of the air conditioning. She could see Jason's bedroom door at the end of the hallway, slightly ajar. A smile played across her lips as she imagined his reaction when he woke up to find her there. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly before her as she crept forward, careful to avoid the spots she knew would groan under her weight. After dating Jason for almost 3 years, she knew this house almost as well as her own. She knew which floorboards would betray her presence, which doors needed an extra push to open quietly, and exactly how many steps it took to reach Jason's room from the top of the stairs. 15 steps. She had counted them countless times before. The door didn't make a sound as she pushed it open wider. Moonlight spilled across Jason's bed, illuminating the lumpy form beneath the covers. Lily could see the steady rise and fall of breathing, and her heart swelled with anticipation. She slipped off her shoes and carefully set her purse down by the door. The air felt different in here, thicker somehow, with an unfamiliar scent she couldn't quite place. Not Jason's usual cologne, but something mustier, earthier. She dismissed the thought. He had been away for weeks. Maybe he had switched brands. Lily pattered across the carpet, her sock-covered feet silent against the plush surface. The figure in the bed didn't stir as she approached. Jason had always been a heavy sleeper, one of the many endearing things about him that made this surprise possible. She carefully lifted the corner of the comforter and slid underneath, trying not to disturb the sleeping form beside her. The bed felt different too, harder than she remembered, with sheets that seemed rougher against her skin. But it had been 3 weeks since she'd last been here. Maybe her memory was playing tricks on her. Lily snuggled closer to the warm body next to her, breathing in deeply. The strange scent was stronger now, almost overwhelming. She wrinkled her nose, wondering again about the unfamiliar smell. But she was here now, and all she wanted to do was curl up next to Jason and surprise him when he woke up. The figure shifted slightly, and Lily held her breath, wondering if she had woken him. But the breathing remained steady and deep. She relaxed, letting her own eyes drift close as she settled in to wait for morning. Suddenly, her phone buzzed in her back pocket. Lily's eyes flew open. Who would be texting her at this hour? She carefully extracted the phone, trying not to move too much. The screen's harsh light made her squint as she checked the notification. It was Jason. Her blood ran cold as she read the message. "Hey babe, just landed in Chicago. Layover delayed. Won't be home until tomorrow afternoon. Miss you." Lily's entire body went rigid. Her lungs seemed to forget how to draw breath. Slowly, terrifyingly slowly, she turned her head to look at the figure lying next to her in the darkness. The steady breathing had stopped. For one endless moment, Lily lay perfectly still, her mind refusing to process what was happening. Then she felt the mattress shift as the figure beside her began to move. Lily exploded out of the bed, her phone clattering to the floor as she scrambled backward. Her foot caught in the twisted sheets, and she went down hard, her elbow cracking against the bedside table. Pain shot up her arm, but adrenaline drowned it out as she fought to free herself from the tangled bedding. The figure sat up. In the moonlight, streaming through the window, Lily could see a grotesque form of decay. Blackened, leathery skin, pulled tight over protruding bones, patches missing to reveal the yellow skeleton beneath. The torso was bloated, splits in the rotting flesh seeping dark fluid into the sheets. As it turned toward her, she saw the face, sunken eye sockets crawling with tiny white shapes, the nose completely gone, leaving a dark cavity in the center. The jaw hung at an impossible angle, tendons long since deteriorated, revealing a grinning row of exposed teeth. Some fallen, others loose and decaying gums. The stench of putrefaction rolled off in waves. A scream built in her throat, but terror had frozen her vocal cords. She finally kicked free of the sheets and scrambled to her feet, nearly falling again in her desperate rush to reach the door. Behind her, she heard the rustle of bedding as the figure moved. Lily burst into the hallway, her sock-covered feet slipping on the hardwood floor. She could hear heavy footsteps behind her now, accompanied by a sound that might have been breathing, but reminded her more of wind howling through dead trees. The 15 steps to the stairs became 3 frantic bounds. She missed the first step entirely, her foot finding empty air instead of solid ground. For one horrible moment, she was falling forward into darkness. Her hand caught the railing at the last second, and she used the momentum to swing herself around the corner of the staircase. The thing from the bed was at the top of the stairs now. Lily didn't look back, couldn't look back, but she could feel its presence like a physical weight pressing down on her. The air had grown thick and cold, that earthy smell now so strong it made her gag. She took the rest of the stairs 3 and 4 at a time, barely keeping her balance. Her elbow throbbed where she had hit it, and she could feel warm liquid running down her arm. The front doors seemed miles away as she sprinted across the living room, knocking over a lamp in her desperate flight. The crash of breaking glass behind her told her the thing was on the stairs now. Its footsteps were impossibly fast, impossibly heavy, shaking the entire house with each impact. Lily reached the front door and yanked on the handle. It didn't budge. She had locked it behind her when she came in. Of course she had. She always did. It was automatic after 3 years of visiting this house. Her trembling fingers scrabbled at the deadbolt, seemingly taking years to find the lock and turn it. She could hear the footsteps getting closer, could smell that horrible earthen stench growing stronger. The door finally swung open, and Lily burst out into the night air. She didn't stop to close it behind her, didn't pause to look for her car. She just ran, her feet pounding against the sidewalk as she sprinted down the suburban street. Each streetlight she passed seemed dimmer than the last, the shadows between them growing longer and darker. She ran until her lungs were on fire, until the only sound she could hear was her own ragged breathing and the slap of her sock-covered feet against the pavement. Finally, she slowed enough to risk a glance behind her. The street was empty. Lily stopped, doubling over as she tried to catch her breath. Her whole body was shaking, and her elbow was definitely bleeding where she had hit it. As her panic began to subside, rational thought started to creep back in. Her phone, her purse, her shoes, and her car, all still at Jason's house. Jason's house, where something had been sleeping in his bed, where something had chased her down the stairs and through the living room, where something might still be waiting. With trembling fingers, Lily patted her pockets, praying she'd somehow manage to grab her phone in her panic. Nothing. She looked around, trying to get her bearings in the unfamiliar part of the neighborhood. She needed to find help, needed to call Jason, needed to figure out what the hell had just happened. A few houses down, she could see lights on in a window. Before she could talk herself out of it, Lily hurried toward the house. As she approached the front door, she noticed a police car parked in the driveway. Relief flooded through her as she rang the doorbell. A middle-aged woman answered, concern evident on her face as she took in Lily's disheveled appearance and bleeding arm. Behind her, a police officer stepped into view. "Please," Lily gasped, her voice hoarse from running. "Please, I need help. There's something in my boyfriend's house. Something was in his bed. I thought it was him, but he's in Chicago and—" "Slow down," the officer said, stepping forward. "Take a breath. What's the address?" Lily told them, watching as the officer and the woman exchanged a look she couldn't quite read. "That house has been empty for months," the woman said slowly. Ever since that terrible accident with that young couple, Lily felt the world tilt sideways. "No," she said. "No, that's not right. My boyfriend lives there. Jason Anderson. I was just there. I just ran from there." "Jason Anderson?" The officer's face had gone pale. "Miss, Jason Anderson and his girlfriend Lily Matthews Died in a house fire there 3 months ago. Lily's legs gave out. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was her own reflection in the storm door's glass, her face pale and ghostly in the porch light, her clothes covered in ash instead of blood. And behind her, at the end of the street, a familiar silver Honda Civic that seemed to flicker like a mirage in the darkness. When Jason Anderson returned home the next evening, he found his house exactly as he'd left it 3 weeks ago. The only signs that anything was amiss were a single pair of women's shoes by his bedroom door and an ash-covered phone on his bedroom floor. Moonlight spilled across his bed, illuminating the lumpy form beneath the covers. A smile spread across his face as he watched the steady rise and fall of breathing, and his heart swelled with anticipation. Welcome, restless souls, to Carman's Crypt. I'm Carman Carrion, keeper of forgotten tales and curator of nightmares. You've wandered into my domain, where each week I unearth a fresh horror from the depths of human imagination. In these darkened halls, stories wait like hungry shadows. Each tale we've collected whispers of terrors both ancient and new. From crumbling mansions where something skitters behind the walls, to that strange text message you received at 3 a.m. from a number that shouldn't exist. So gather close. The candles are lit, the shadows grow long, and the witching hour is upon us. Are you prepared to face what lurks in the darkest recesses of Carman's Crypt? Lock your doors, still your nerves, and remember, here, every fear comes alive. This is Carman's Crypt. Your sanctuary of scares awaits.
The Seattle Times, June 18, 1996. Search continues for missing hikers in Deadfall Forest. By Michael Reynolds, staff writer. Local authorities have entered their 3rd week of searching for Shanna and David Martin, who disappeared during a camping trip in Deadfall Forest. The couple's vehicle was found in the parking lot of Morton's General Store, the last known business operating in the remote area. Store owner Thomas Morton reported the couple purchasing camping supplies on May 28th, the last confirmed sighting. They seemed excited, prepared, Morton told investigators, said they were heading to the east side of the lake. Despite extensive searches of the area, only a torn backpack and damaged camera have been recovered. This marks the 7th disappearance in Deadfall Forest since 1969, all occurring during the week of a full moon. Local authorities maintain the incidents are unrelated, citing wildlife activity and treacherous terrain as likely factors. 3 weeks earlier, May 28, 1996, Shanna Martin adjusted her new backpack straps, breathing in the crisp mountain air. The general store's bell jangled behind them as David consulted their trail map. First time in Deadfall? The clerk's voice made her jump. She hadn't heard him approach. Impressive for such a tall man. His name tag read, Morton, in faded letters. That obvious, huh? David smiled, folding the map. We're hoping to get some good shots for Sarah's photography portfolio. Morton's lips twitched. Plenty to photograph out there. Beautiful territory. His eyes caught the fluorescent light strangely as he reached for something under the counter. Take my advice. Stick to the east side of the lake. Other areas can be treacherous. Sarah noticed his hands then, unusually large, with thick yellowed nails that seemed more like claws. She shivered despite the warm day. Thank you. We will, David said, helping Shanna adjust her camera strap. Morton watched them load their car, standing unnaturally still. Only his eyes moved, tracking their movements with predatory intensity. That night, their tent pitched on the wrong side of the lake. Shanna would remember those eyes. She'd remember them as the shadows around their campsite grew darker, as twisted howls echoed across the water. She'd remember them as something massive approached their tent, its footsteps too deliberate to be an animal, too heavy to be human. Her last photo, recovered weeks later, would show a hulking silhouette, half hidden in the darkness. And there, catching the camera's flash. A glint of metal, a faded name tag still pinned to matted fur. Present day, Pete's Diner, 30 miles from Deadfall Forest. Jack, a 28-year-old software developer from Seattle, and Jamie, a 25-year-old environmental journalist, were an unlikely pair in many ways. Jack, the cautious planner who'd barely set foot outside the city limits, and Jamie, raised by outdoor enthusiasts who'd taught her to respect nature's power. The camping trip had been Jack's idea, an attempt to prove himself worthy of this woman who seemed so at ease in the natural world. "Are you sure about this?" Jamie asked as they stood in the diner parking lot, taking inventory of their camping gear. All new, price tags barely removed. She had noticed Jack checking and rechecking his meticulous packing list, his programmer's mind trying to reduce wilderness survival to a series of logical steps. "Of course," Jack grinned, masking his anxiety with humor. "I've watched every camping tutorial on YouTube. I'm practically Bear Grylls now." He chuckled as he closed the back hatch of Jamie's Subaru before they headed to the entrance of the diner.
"You folks headed up to Deadfall?"
The old man's voice crackled like autumn leaves as he refilled their coffee cups. Jack nodded, showing him their trail map. Pete, according to his grease-stained apron, set down the coffee pot with trembling hands.
"Might want to reconsider. Strange place, Deadfall. Stranger store."
He glanced around the empty diner before continuing.
"My granddad helped build that store back in '32. Original owner was Thomas Morton, a good man. Everyone said. Then one night, full moon course, he wandered into the forest. Search party found his clothes 2 days later, torn to shreds. But no body."
He leaned closer, dropping to a whisper.
"Here's the thing. A week later, store reopened. The owner called himself Thomas Morton too. Looked just like him. Claimed to be his cousin. But old-timers like my granddad, they noticed things. How his hands seemed wrong, too big. How he never aged."
Pete nodded slowly.
"Sure was. Same Morton's still there, as far as anyone can tell. Folks who look too close at the dates tend to go missing, especially during full moons."
He straightened up, adjusting his apron.
"But that's just local legend, mind you. I'm sure the camping's fine this time of year."
The bell above the diner's door jangled as he walked away, the sound eerily similar to another bell they'd soon hear. Neither Jack nor Jamie noticed how Pete's hands shook as he wrote their bill, nor the way his eyes caught the light just so, reflecting gold for just a moment. Their next stop was the exact local general store that they had talked about with the waiter earlier, the only outpost for miles around Deadfall Forest. The bell above the door jangled discordantly as they entered, and Jamie immediately noticed something odd about the place. Though well stocked, every item on the shelves seemed to have a thin layer of dust, as if rarely touched. Behind the counter stood the clerk, a tall, gaunt man with eyes that seemed to catch the light strangely. His name tag read Morton, though the letters were so faded they were barely legible. As Jamie approached with their supplies, she noticed his hands, unusually large, with thick, yellowed nails.
"Camping in Deadfall?"
Morton's voice was rough, as if rarely used. When Jamie nodded, his lips curled into what might have been a smile.
"Brave choice. Not many folks camp there these days. Too many bears."
Jack laughed nervously, but Jamie noticed how Morton's eyes tracked their movements, how he seemed to be memorizing their faces. As he rang up their supplies, his hands trembled slightly, and Jamie caught a glimpse of what looked like deep scratches running up his arms, partially hidden by his sleeves.
"You'll want to stay close to the lake."
Morton advised, his voice oddly intense.
"The east side. Other areas aren't safe."
He paused, then added with that strange, almost smile,
"I'll be keeping an eye out for you both."
As they left, Jamie glanced back through the store window. Morton stood absolutely still, watching them, his silhouette somehow wrong in the fading light. The drive was long, the sun sinking below the horizon as they finally reached the forest's edge. The air was cool, the silence broken only by the rustle of leaves and the distant hooting of an owl. They found a clearing by the lake, where Jack proceeded to set up their tent with mathematical precision, consulting his phone's camping app every few minutes. Jamie suppressed a smile as she watched him. She could have done it in half the time, but understood his need to take charge. Instead, she busied herself gathering firewood, her journalist's mind cataloging the strange stillness of the forest, the unusual absence of wildlife sounds. The first night passed uneventfully. They roasted marshmallows over a crackling fire, and Jamie shared stories from her childhood camping trips. Jack listened intently, both fascinated and slightly intimidated by her experience. Under the starlit sky, he felt the familiar pressure to be a protector, even as he secretly wished for her guidance. After their first peaceful night, they woke to a warm morning that betrayed no hint of the terror to come. Over breakfast, Jamie suggested they explore the area around their campsite. "We should get the lay of the land," she said, her journalist's instinct pushing her to investigate. "Something about this place feels different." They spent the morning hiking along the lake shore, following Morton's suggested route. Jack kept checking his hiking app, marking their location, while Jamie noticed things her outdoor experience told her were wrong. There were no small animals, no squirrels or chipmunks. Even the birds seemed scarce. Around midday, they found the first disturbing sign. Jamie spotted what looked like claw marks on a tree trunk, massive gouges that were too high up for a bear, too deep for a mountain lion. Jack photographed them, his app automatically tagging the location. "Could be old," he said, not sounding convinced, from before they closed this section of the trail. But Jamie noticed the wood wasn't weathered. These marks were fresh. They pressed on, finding more unsettling signs. A clearing where the undergrowth had been crushed, as if something massive had been sleeping there. Scattered bones that Jamie initially thought were deer remains, until she found a torn backpack strap among them. Jack wanted to turn back then, but Jamie insisted on documenting everything with her camera. The strangest discovery came mid-afternoon. They found footprints in a muddy section of trail, but these weren't animal tracks. They started as human shoe prints, about the size of a large man's feet, then seemed to elongate, distort, and finally transform into something monstrous. Jamie and Jack stood staring at them, their minds refusing to process what they were seeing. "Maybe it's a prank," Jack suggested weakly. "Local kids messing with tourists." "We're out in the middle of nowhere. I don't think the local kids would be playing this far from town," Jamie replied as she knelt to examine the prints more closely. That's when she noticed something glinting in the mud. She reached down and pulled out a rusty nameplate with a familiar general store logo, the name on the tag unreadable. They hurried back to their campsite as the sun began to set, the weight of their discovery sitting heavy in their minds. Neither wanted to suggest packing up and leaving. Jack because he didn't want to appear cowardly, Jamie because her reporter's curiosity was piqued. They made dinner in tense silence, jumping at every snapping twig. As darkness fell, Jamie organized the photos on her camera, while Jack tried to distract himself by tending the fire. Neither mentioned the growing unease that something was watching them from the deepening shadows. That's when Jack remembered Morton's strange smile, his insistence they camp on the east side of the lake. He was about to suggest they move their tent when they heard it, a low growl that pierced the silence of their second night in Deadfall Forest. Despite their growing unease, exhaustion from the day's discoveries eventually overcame them. They double-checked the tent's zippers and huddled close together in their sleeping bags, the weight of their camping gear arranged in a protective barrier around them. Jamie wished she had insisted on bringing a gun, but Jack had been adamant about his statistical analysis showing that bear spray was both safer and more effective, citing 3 different wilderness safety studies he had found online. The fire died down to glowing embers, and the forest's oppressive silence finally lulled them into an uneasy sleep. They had been asleep for a few hours when Jack awoke with a start. A sound, a low growl, had pierced the silence. He sat up, his heart pounding, straining to hear anything more. Jamie stirred beside him. "What's wrong?" she whispered, her hand finding his in the darkness. "I heard something," Jack replied, his voice tight with controlled fear. He reached for his flashlight, top rated on Amazon, he'd proudly told her, its beam cutting through the darkness. Outside, the forest was still, the trees casting eerie shadows in the moonlight. Jack unzipped the tent flap, peering into the night. Nothing. He was about to dismiss it as his imagination when he caught a glimpse of movement in the distance, a pair of glowing eyes watching them from the tree line. He quickly retreated back into the tent, his heart hammering in his chest. "There's something out there," he told Jamie, his voice barely a whisper. She noticed he was shaking, but trying to hide it, still clinging to his role as protector. Fear gripped them both as they lay there, listening. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent shivers down their spines. The growling returned, closer now, more menacing. They could hear heavy footsteps crunching through the undergrowth, circling their tent. Jack grabbed the bear spray and a knife from his backpack, his knuckles white as he gripped the knife handle. Jamie's mind raced through everything she knew about wildlife encounters, every lesson her parents had taught her. This wasn't like any animal behavior she'd ever heard of. "Whatever it is, it's getting closer," Jack said, his voice strained but steady. Despite his fear, he positioned himself between Jamie and the tent entrance. She felt a surge of affection, even as her practical mind told her they needed to work together to survive. The creature outside let out a roar, shaking the very ground beneath them. The tent walls rippled as something large and heavy brushed against them. Jamie's journalist's instinct screamed that this was impossible, that no known animal made sounds like this. Suddenly, the tent flap was ripped open, moonlight flooding in. They looked up to see a monstrous silhouette filling the entrance. It was huge, its fur matted and dark, its eyes glowing, its claws long and sharp, glinted in the moonlight. The beast lunged, its roar echoing through the forest. Jack thrust the knife forward, his tech work hands steady despite their unfamiliarity with weapons. The beast was too quick, swatting him aside like a toy. Jamie's training kicked in. She grabbed their camping lantern, one of the few tools she'd insisted on choosing herself, and swung it hard at the creature's head. The glass shattered against its skull with a satisfying crack. The beast roared in pain, momentarily stunned. Jamie seized the opportunity, pulling Jack to his feet. "Run!" she commanded, taking the lead for the first time since they'd entered the forest. Jack followed without hesitation, his pride forgotten in the face of survival. They ran blindly through the forest, the moonlight their only guide. Jamie's childhood orienteering lessons helped her keep them moving in a relatively straight line, even as the beast's growls echoed behind them. Jack's long legs kept pace with her, his marathon training endurance finally proving useful outside the city. As they fled through the forest, Jamie's mind kept returning to Morton's words, "Stay close to the lake." They were running away from the water now, deeper into the woods. They stumbled upon an old cabin, its windows boarded up, its door hanging off its hinges. Jamie's quick thinking led them inside, while Jack's technical mind immediately assessed the structure's weaknesses. Together, they barricaded the door with a fallen table, their breath coming in ragged gasps. In the cabin, as they huddled together, Jamie suddenly remembered something else. When Morton had handed her the receipt, she had noticed a calendar on the wall behind him. Every full moon was marked with a red X, and tonight's date had been circled. They huddled in a corner, listening for any sign of the creature. The silence was deafening. Minutes turned into hours, the night dragging on endlessly. They dared not sleep, their eyes wide with fear, their ears straining for any sound. Just as dawn began to break, they heard it, a scratching at the door, followed by a low growl. The beast had found them. Desperation set in. They searched the cabin frantically for anything that could help them. Jamie found an old shotgun mounted on the wall, its barrel coated in dust. She grabbed it, muscle memory from childhood hunting trips with her father taking over as she checked the weapon. Her heart leaped when she broke open the action. 2 shells still nestled in the chambers, their brass tarnished but intact. She quickly checked the shells for signs of corrosion or damage, relieved to find them still firm and solid. Just 2 shots. They would have to count. The scratching grew louder, the growls more insistent. The door creaked under the strain. Jack analyzed the cabin's layout, quickly calculating angles and positions. There! He pointed to a spot that gave them the best vantage point while maintaining cover. But as it burst through the door, Jamie saw its eyes catch the moonlight, and recognition struck her like lightning. She had seen those eyes before, across a counter just yesterday. The beast, Morton, was upon them, its grotesque form a twisted mixture of man and monster. But Jack and Jamie weren't helpless city folk anymore. As Jamie fired the shotgun, the blast caught the creature in its chest. The cabin filled with smoke as the beast stumbled backward, its roars turning into pained whimpers, blood matted its dark fur. And there, glinting in the moonlight, a tarnished name tag still pinned to its chest. Morton. The wounds only enraged it. The beast lunged again, eyes blazing with inhuman fury. The same strange, light-catching eyes that had watched them from behind the store counter. Jamie's second shot caught it in the head, the impact throwing it back. But still it rose, shaking off the injury like a mild annoyance. Jack grabbed Jamie's arm. "Run!" They burst from the cabin into the pre-dawn forest, the creature's howls of rage following close behind. They could hear it crashing through the undergrowth, injured but far from stopped. Each thundering footfall brought it closer, its breath hot on their heels. The first rays of sunlight pierced through the trees. The beast's howl suddenly changed pitch, becoming something between a roar and a human scream. When they dared to look back, they saw Morton's form twisting in the morning light, fur receding, claws shrinking, until the store clerk stumbled after them on 2 legs, his yellowed nails still grotesquely long, his hands still unnaturally large. The transformation slowed him enough for them to escape, but they knew it wasn't over. As they fled the forest, supporting each other, their relationship was forever changed by what they had discovered about the true nature of monsters, how they could hide in plain sight, wearing human faces, waiting behind shop counters to direct their prey exactly where they wanted them. Back in Seattle, they spent weeks researching the history of Deadfall Forest and Morton's General Store. They discovered newspaper archives detailing the store's closure decades ago, after Morton himself had disappeared into the forest during a full moon. The store had been abandoned ever since, though hikers occasionally reported seeing lights inside at night, and a tall, gaunt man offering camping supplies and directions. They told their story to few, and those who heard it dismissed it as trauma and exhaustion. But whenever they traveled now, they noticed things they hadn't before. Shop clerks whose movements seemed just slightly wrong, whose eyes caught the light in strange ways, whose smiles never quite reached their eyes. They became careful about which stores they entered, especially near forests, especially close to the full moon. They still went camping, but never again near small, isolated stores that seemed too quiet, too dusty, yet somehow still open for business. Their love had grown stronger, tempered by terror and survival, but on a shared understanding that true monsters don't always lurk in the depths of the forest. Sometimes they stand behind counters, wearing name tags and human skin, patiently waiting for their next victims to walk through the door. And Morton's General Store? Some say on full moon nights, you can still see lights inside, still hear that discordant bell as the door opens for unwary travelers. And if you look carefully at the faded sign, you might notice it's written in an ink that looks suspiciously like dried blood.
Welcome, restless souls, to Carman's Crypt. I'm Carman Carrion, keeper of forgotten tales and curator of nightmares. You've wandered into my domain, where each week I unearth a fresh horror from the depths of human imagination. In these darkened halls, stories wait like hungry shadows. Each tale we've collected whispers of terrors both ancient and new. From crumbling mansions where something skitters behind the walls, to that strange text message you received at 3 a.m. from a number that shouldn't exist. So gather close. The candles are lit, the shadows grow long, and the witching hour is upon us. Are you prepared to face what lurks in the darkest recesses of Carman's Crypt? Lock your doors, still your nerves, and remember, here, every fear comes alive. This is Carman's Crypt. Your sanctuary of scares awaits. Kim Novak stood in her darkened office, staring at the old newspaper clipping pinned to her bulletin board. The yellowed headline read, "Local child missing after blizzard. No traces found." The article, dated 20 years ago, included a photo of a young girl with dark hair and bright eyes. Another little girl stood beside her in the photo, their arms around each other. "Best friends," the caption said. Only one would survive that winter. Kim unpinned the clipping, her hands shaking slightly. She had been that surviving girl. Jenny, her best friend, had vanished during the worst storm of 1994. They had been having a sleepover at Jenny's house when they heard the crying outside. Jenny had been convinced it was her little brother, locked out somehow. Before anyone could stop her, she had opened the door. Kim remembered the sudden blast of cold air, the way Jenny had stood frozen in the doorway, staring at something in the swirling snow. Then she had stepped outside, despite Kim's screams. They found Jenny's footprints in the snow the next morning. They led to the woods behind the house, then simply stopped, just like all the others. The entities had returned several times over the years, always during the worst storms. They had tried to take her son Justin when he was 5, appearing as his preschool friends outside his window. Kim had recognized the signs, the strange crying, the familiar faces pressed against the glass. She had held him all night, singing to drown out their calls. When Bree was born, Kim had sworn to protect her children from the fate that took Jenny. She had researched obsessively, tracking storm patterns, gathering stories from other towns. The entities seemed drawn to children, using their faces and voices to lure others out. But they would take adults too, if given the chance. She kept a journal documenting each encounter. They couldn't enter unless invited. They couldn't perfectly mimic shadows. They left no tracks in snow or mud. They came in groups, never alone. They always used familiar faces. They grew angry when denied. They only came during storms. The information was a cold comfort on nights like this, when the wind howled and the snow fell thick. Kim knew they were out there, wearing stolen faces, waiting for someone to make a mistake. She had hired Mary not just as a babysitter, but as a guardian, though she couldn't bring herself to tell the young woman the whole truth. Sometimes, on the worst nights, Kim thought she could still hear Jenny calling her name in the wind. It was a month earlier when Mary Sullivan heard the first rumors. She was restocking shelves at Henderson's General Store when she overheard Mrs. Patterson talking to old Mr. Burke by the coffee machine. "Just like the Miller boy in '89, Mrs. Patterson whispered. "No tracks, no trace, just an open door and empty beds. Third one this winter," Mr. Burke replied, his voice gravelly. "Always during the big storms, too. Remember that family out on Ridge Road? All 3 of them gone. Door wide open, TV still playing, dinner half eaten on the table." Mary tried to focus on arranging cans, but found herself straining to hear more. My sister over in Augusta says it's happening there too," Mrs. Patterson continued. "Her neighbor's kid went missing last month. Said she heard her daughter crying outside during a snowstorm. Went to check and—" She made a vanishing gesture with her hands. "Funny thing is," Mr. Burke leaned closer, "they found her daughter sound asleep in bed. Whatever was crying outside just sounded like her." Mary dropped a can of corn. Both elderly customers jumped, then quickly changed the subject to safer topics like church socials and grandchildren. That night, Mary started researching local disappearances. The pattern was impossible to ignore. All during major storms, all without tracks, all preceded by voices in the wind. Mary hadn't planned on babysitting during the worst blizzard of the year, but emergencies don't care about the weather. Growing up in the rural Maine had taught her two things. Blizzards were serious business, and helping neighbors wasn't optional. That's what her father had always said, right up until the day he had died trying to help a stranded motorist in a storm much like this one. The official report said he'd slipped on ice and hit his head, but they never did find the driver he'd gone to help. Maybe that's why Mary had hesitated when Dr. Novak called. It wasn't the storm itself that scared her. She had seen plenty of those in her 19 years. It was the memory of the night he died, the way the police had described finding her father's truck, engine running, driver's door open, with no footprints in the snow except those leading away from the vehicle. They had vanished after 10 feet, as if someone had plucked him right off the ground. And then there was the Novak children's strange behavior the week before. It was on Tuesday night when Mary found Justin standing at his bedroom window, staring into the backyard. It was nearly midnight. She had stayed late because Dr. Novak was caught in surgery. "Justin, you should be asleep." He didn't turn around. "They're watching the house." "Who is?" "The other kids. They look like us, but they're not us." His voice was flat, emotionless. "They're waiting for the big storm." Mary felt a chill run down her spine. "There's nobody out there, Justin. Come on, back to bed." He finally turned, his expression troubled. "Dad says I'm not supposed to talk about them. He says it makes Mom upset." Then on Thursday, Bree's behavior during art time was the first real warning sign. Instead of her usual bright drawings of pandas and rainbows, she filled page after page with dark figures standing in the snow. They all had the same face, her face, but with empty black eyes. "What are you drawing, sweetie?" "The cold children," Bree said, not looking up. "They want to play with me, but Mommy says I can't let them in, even if they look like me and Justin." "When did you see these children?" "In my dreams. But they say they're coming for us real soon, when the snow gets bad." She reached for a black crayon. And then Friday afternoon, the weather report predicted the worst storm in years. Mary arrived to find both children sitting on the stairs, waiting. "You shouldn't stay," Justin said immediately. "They know you're coming. They know Dad's away." Bree clutched her favorite panda. "They're excited. I can feel it." "Who's excited?" The siblings exchanged looks. "The others," they said in unison. Dr. Novak arrived home then, interrupting the conversation. But as she rushed to get ready for her shift, Mary noticed her placing salt across the windowsills. In the kitchen, she found strange symbols drawn in chalk above the doors. "Just some old habits," Dr. Novak said when she caught Mary looking. "My grandmother was superstitious about storms." But her hands shook as she drew the last symbol. As she left for the hospital, she gripped Mary's arm. "Whatever happens tonight, whatever you hear, remember that my children are inside with you. Anything that looks like them outside is lying." Mary dismissed the strange warning with an uneasy shiver. She had bills to think about now, Her mom had never fully recovered from her father's death, the grief triggering a depression that left her unable to work full-time. So Mary had put her college plans on hold, turning her weekend babysitting job into a full-time gig, along with working at the store. It was just enough to make ends meet. The parents in town trusted her. She was responsible, level-headed, and good with kids. More importantly, she genuinely cared about the children she watched. She had been there for Justin's first ball game and had helped Bree learn to read. They weren't just clients, they were her extended family. Dr. Kim Novak, a trauma surgeon at Memorial Hospital, had been called in for an emergency surgery after 3 cars collided on the icy highway. With her husband stuck in Chicago due to canceled flights, she had desperately called Mary, her most trusted sitter. Mary knew the Novak kids well, 10-year-old Justin and 7-year-old Bree. They were good kids, smart and well-behaved, though Justin had been going through a phase where he tried to seem too cool for everything, and Bree still insisted on sleeping with her collection of stuffed pandas. The snow had started falling heavily by the time Mary arrived at 6 p.m. Dr. Novak had rushed out, apologizing profusely and promising to be back as soon as she could. "Everything you need is in the fridge," she had said, hurrying to her car. "Just please don't leave them alone tonight." Something in Dr. Novak's voice made Mary pause. It wasn't just the usual concern of a parent leaving their children. There had been real fear there, though Mary couldn't imagine why. She found Justin sprawled on the couch, determinedly ignoring his sister's elaborate tea party set up on the coffee table. "Mary!" Bree bounced up, her dark curls wild around her face. "You have to come to my tea party. Mr. Snuggles is being difficult." She pointed accusingly at a worn panda bear slouched against a tiny teacup. "I told you no one wants to play with your stupid bears anymore," Justin muttered, not looking up from his phone. "You're too old for that baby stuff. Mom says you're just being a grump because you're growing up too fast." Mary hung up her coat, watching the familiar dynamic play out. "You know, Justin, I heard there's a new climbing wall at the community center. Maybe we could check it out this weekend." "Really?" "Dad said he'd take me, but he's always working." "Well, I'm certified to belay, if your parents approve." Mary let the offer hang. Justin sat up straighter, trying to hide his excitement behind practiced indifference. "I guess that would be cool." "Can I come too?" Bree asked, already forgetting her tea party. "You're too short," Justin said, but without the earlier bite in his voice. "Actually," Mary interjected, "they have a kids' wall, perfect for brave pandas and their owners." The scene melted some of Justin's preteen frost, and soon both siblings were planning their climbing adventures, their usual squabbles temporarily forgotten. The first few hours passed normally enough. They made pizza for dinner, played board games, and watched an animated movie. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and the snow fell so thick it was impossible to see the streetlights. Mary kept checking her phone, but the signal was getting weaker as the storm intensified. The wind brought with it a chill and a memory. 8-year-old Mary pressed her face against the kitchen window, watching snowflakes swirl in the darkness. Her father, James Sullivan, was pulling on his heavy boots by the door. "Why do you have to go?" she asked, not turning from the window. "Because someone might need help," he said, shrugging into his thick winter coat. "Remember what I always tell you about Maine winters?" Mary turned, reciting from memory. "The cold makes people neighbors, and neighbors help neighbors." He smiled, crossing the kitchen to ruffle her hair. "That's right, sweetheart. But there's something else about storms you need to know." He crouched down to her level, his expression serious. "They can fool you. The wind plays tricks. Sometimes you think you hear voices in it." "Like what kind of voices?" "Any kind. People calling for help. Children crying. Even people you know. But here's the important part." He held up his flashlight. If you ever need to help someone in a storm, always use your light. Real people make shadows. Real people leave tracks. The wind? He shook his head. The wind just wants you to think it's people. It was just after 9 p.m. when the first knock came. At first, it was so faint that Mary thought it was just ice hitting the front door. But then it came again, more distinct. 3 soft knocks. Did you hear that? Justin looked up from his tablet, frowning. Before Mary could answer, they heard it again. This time, it was followed by what sounded like a child crying. Someone's outside. Bree jumped up from where she had been coloring on the floor. We have to help them. Mary grabbed Bree's arm before she could run to the door. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. Who would be out in this weather? And why would they bring a child? Another memory flashed through Mary's mind. Mary was 12, helping her father change a flat tire in the rain. Other cars whooshed past on Route 1, throwing up sheets of water. Could have called AAA, she muttered, holding the umbrella over them. Could have, James agreed, working the jack. But then you wouldn't learn how to do this yourself. He glanced up at her. Life's going to give you flat tires, Mary, literal and figurative. Knowing how to fix them yourself means you'll never be helpless. Thunder cracked overhead, making her jump. Her father's hand found hers, steady and warm despite the cold rain. Being scared is okay, he said softly. Being helpless isn't. That's why we learn. That's why we prepare. The crying grew louder, more desperate. It was definitely a child, and they sounded terrified. Please, a small voice called through the door. Please let me in. I'm so cold. Mary pulled both children behind her heart pounding. The voice sounded young, maybe Bree's age, but there was something off about it, something that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. I'll call the police, she said, reaching for her phone. No signal. Mary? Justin's voice was shaking. Mary, look. He was pointing at the large bay window next to the door. Through the swirling snow, pressed against the glass, was a face. A child's face. Mary felt her blood run cold. The face belonged to a little girl with long dark hair and frightened eyes. She looked so much like Bree that for a moment, Mary thought she was seeing things. But Bree was right behind her, clutching her sweater. That's me, Bree whispered. But I'm here. Before Mary could process what she was seeing, another face appeared at the window. A boy, around Justin's age, with the same features as the child standing beside her. The faces pressed harder against the glass, their breath fogging the window. Please let us in, they called in unison. We're so cold. We've been out here so long. Don't answer, Justin said suddenly, his voice strange and distant. It's them, the others. Mom told me about this. She said if we ever see ourselves outside, don't let them in, no matter what. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. The faces at the window began to change, their eyes growing darker, their expressions shifting from pleading to angry.
Let us in.
The voices were no longer childlike. They were deep, distorted, and full of malice. Mary backed away, pulling the children with her. Upstairs, she whispered. Now. As they ran up the stairs, the pounding on the door became deafening. Through the windows, Mary could see more faces appearing, dozens of them, all looking like Justin and Bree, all pressing against the glass, all screaming to be let in. They barricaded themselves in Dr. Novak's bedroom, pushing a heavy dresser against the door. Outside, the storm raged on, and something that wore the faces of children continued to call their names, growing angrier with each passing hour. Mary checked her phone again. 11:47 p.m. The battery was at 15%, and still no signal. The pounding had stopped about an hour ago, but the silence was somehow worse. They could hear movement outside, soft footsteps in the snow, whispered conversations in familiar voices, occasional bursts of childlike laughter that made her skin crawl. Bree sat huddled in her mother's walk-in closet, wrapped in a thick blanket, clutching Mr. Snuggles. Justin had positioned himself by the bedroom window, peering through the tiny gap in the curtains. His face was pale in the dim light of Mary's phone flashlight. "They're still there," he whispered, "but they look different now." Mary didn't want to look, but she had to know. She crept to the window, careful to stay mostly hidden behind the curtain. What she saw made her shiver. The creatures still wore Justin and Bree's faces, but wrong somehow. Their movements were too fluid, too smooth, like watching someone move underwater. Their heads turned at impossible angles as they circled the house. Some walked on all fours, their limbs bent backwards. Others stood impossibly still, staring up at the windows with black, empty eyes. "Mary?" Bree's voice trembled from the closet. "Can you tell us a story, like you do when there's thunder?" Before Mary could answer, they heard it, a sound that made them all freeze. Someone was singing downstairs. It was Bree's voice, singing the lullaby her mother always sang to her, but it was coming from outside, somehow seeming to emanate from every window at once. "That's not me," Bree whimpered. "I'm here. That's not me." The singing grew louder, and with it came scratching, dozens of small fingers dragging across every pane of glass in the house. Mary's phone flashlight flickered and died. "The emergency kit," Justin whispered urgently. "Mom keeps one under her bed." Mary felt around in the darkness until her hands found a plastic container. Inside, she found fresh batteries, flashlights, and, thank God, a hand-crank emergency radio. As she loaded fresh batteries into her flashlight, the singing stopped, replaced by a new sound. "Justin? Bree?" It was their father's voice now, seeming to come from just outside their window. "Why are you hiding? I made it home early to surprise you. Please, just open the window. That's all you have to do." Justin grabbed Mary's arm, his fingers digging in. "Dad's still in Chicago," he whispered. "Mom texted earlier. He's still there." The window rattled violently. In the beam of her flashlight, Mary saw dozens of small handprints appearing on the glass, freezing into ice before fading away. The temperature in the room plummeted. "Let me in," their father's voice said. Then their mother's, then Mary's own voice, cycling through them like someone flipping radio stations. "Just say the word. Just invite me in. Don't you want to see what I really look like?" Something heavy slammed against the side of the house, making the walls shake. The window glass began to crack under the pressure of the cold, thin fissures spreading like spider webs. They retreated to the master bathroom, locking the door. Mary turned on her flashlight, wedged a towel under the door to block the light, and pulled them into the massive garden tub. Hours passed like this. Sometimes they heard familiar voices calling them, pleading or demanding to be invited in. Sometimes they heard screaming, terrible, agonized screams that sounded like everyone they'd ever loved being tortured. Sometimes they heard nothing at all, which was almost worse. Around 3 a.m., the radio crackled to life without being touched. Through bursts of static, they heard fragments of an emergency broadcast. "Remain indoors. Do not respond. multiple reports of missing persons. At 4:13 a.m., every mirror in the bathroom suddenly reflected their own faces pressed against the glass from the other side. Mouths open in silent screams, fingers clawing to get through. Mary covered them with towels, but they could still hear the scratching, still feel the cold radiating from the silvered surfaces. When the first light of dawn began to seep through the bathroom window, the scratching stopped. They heard a car in the driveway, keys in the front door, Dr. Novak's voice, her real voice, calling their names in panic. But after what they had been through, they waited until she found them, until they could see her real shadow, hear her real footsteps on the stairs before they dared to move. The bedroom was untouched, but impossibly cold. Every window in the house was covered in small handprints that were already beginning to fade in the morning light. Deep gouges marked the exterior walls, and the window glass, though intact, was threaded with crystalline patterns of frost that looked unsettlingly like pleading faces. Dr. Novak took one look at the evidence of the night's siege and burst into tears. "Not again," she whispered. "Oh God, not again." Outside, the storm passed. The morning sun revealed snow covering the yard, unmarred by footprints, as if nothing had ever been there at all. Only the small handprints on every window remained, slowly melting in the growing light. Mary stood at the kitchen window, watching the last traces of that terrible night disappear with the rising sun. The scene triggered another memory, one that now felt heavy with new meaning. It was the night before her father died. 16-year-old Mary sat at the kitchen table, working on homework, while her father checked the weather radar on his phone. "Bad storm coming," he said, frowning at the screen. "Might need to do some welfare checks tomorrow." "Dad," Mary looked up from her notebook, "why do you always go out in the worst weather? Other people stay home." He was quiet for a moment, considering. "You remember Ms. Larson, 3 winters ago?" Mary nodded. The elderly woman had lived alone on the outskirts of town. If I hadn't checked on her during that ice storm, she would have frozen when her heat went out. Sometimes being a good neighbor means going out when everyone else stays in. He smiled, but there was something sad in his eyes. "Just remember what I taught you about the wind. Real people make shadows," Mary repeated. "Real people leave tracks. That's my girl." He kissed the top of her head. "Now finish your homework. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." Later, when Mary finally worked up the courage to ask Dr. Novak about what Justin had said, the doctor grew pale. "There are things out there," she whispered. "Things that steal faces and voices. They've been here before, trying to take my children. That's why I needed someone to stay with them tonight. They always come during blizzards." Mary thought about leaving and never coming back. Any reasonable person would. But as she watched Justin and Bree playing in the living room the next day, Justin actually joining his sister's tea party for once, both of them still shaken but alive, safe, her father's words echoed in her mind. Being scared is okay. Being helpless isn't. She thought about all the storms her father had ventured into, not because he wasn't afraid, but because someone needed help. She thought about his lessons, about real shadows, real tracks, about being prepared, about how the cold makes people neighbors, and neighbors help neighbors. "I want to know everything," Mary told Dr. Novak that evening. "Everything you know about them, how to fight them, how to protect the children." Dr. Novak stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. She opened her desk drawer and pulled out a worn leather journal. "It started 20 years ago," she began, "with my best friend, Jenny." Welcome, restless souls, to Carman's Crypt. I'm Carman Carrion, keeper of forgotten tales and curator of nightmares. You've wandered into my domain, where each week I unearth a fresh horror from the depths of human imagination. In these darkened halls, stories wait like hungry shadows. Each tale we've collected whispers of terrors both ancient and new. From crumbling mansions where something skitters behind the walls, to that strange text message you received at 3 a.m. from a number that shouldn't exist. So gather close. The candles are lit, the shadows grow long, and the witching hour is upon us. Are you prepared to face what lurks in the darkest recesses of Carman's Crypt? Lock your doors, still your nerves, and remember, here, every fear comes alive. This is Carman's Crypt. Your sanctuary of scares awaits. Mike Sullivan's hands trembled as he packed his gear, the divorce papers still sitting unsigned on his kitchen counter. At 42, hunting season used to be his escape. Now it might be his last chance at normal. His grandfather's Remington felt too heavy as he loaded it into his truck. Ray Cooper's military career ended in Afghanistan after watching his unit get torn apart by an IED. 6 months later, his wife's cancer took what was left of his world. The nightmares kept him awake most nights, but at least his hands stayed steady when he cleaned his rifle. Dave Mitchell's guide service had been his life for 20 years. 3 weeks ago, while marking trails for the upcoming season, he had spotted vultures circling and found the first carcass. It was a buck in a small clearing, turned inside out, its organs arranged like macabre party decorations around the tree line. But something else was terribly wrong. Its eyes had been removed with surgical precision, and its mouth had been peeled open, jaws dislocated to reveal new growth inside. Rows of pulsing, fungal-like growth sprouting from the soft palate like pale fingers reaching for air. 2 days later, he found 3 more deer lying in a triangle, just feet away from each other. Their bodies had been turned inside out, steam still rising from exposed organs despite the freezing temperature. Each carcass showed signs of being inhabited. Tunnels burrowed through muscle tissue, lined with a sickly yellowish membrane that seemed to pulse with its own life. The rangers blamed bears, but Dave had been hunting these woods for 20 years. He knew bear signs. This was something else. Dave had seen old Harris's truck parked by the South Trailhead that morning, a beat-up Ford with a faded "I Love Hunting" bumper sticker. They had been rivals in business, guiding hunts since their youth. Harris had always claimed to know these woods better than anyone, often bragging about secret hunting spots he'd never share. Dave wondered if he had finally found one of those spots. The morning fog clung to the ground as Dave followed the fresh tracks toward Miller's Ridge. The silence bothered him most. No birdsong, no squirrels chattering in the trees. Even the wind seemed to die away, leaving only the crunch of his boots on frozen ground. The air carried a strange odor, like mushrooms growing on rotting meat. He almost missed the first sign something was wrong. A splash of red against white snow, partially obscured by fallen leaves. Dave brushed them aside to reveal Harris's prized hunting knife, its blade clean to a mirror shine, but its handle sticky with what looked like pus-filled blisters. The same yellowish growth he'd seen in the deer carcasses were creeping along the leather grip. The tracks led him to a small clearing, where they suddenly multiplied. Deer prints everywhere, overlapping and churning the soil. Dave's breath caught in his throat. Through the fog, he could make out several deer standing unnaturally still. But these weren't normal deer. Their fur had fallen away in patches, revealing skin stretched too tight over wrongly shaped bones. Thin yellow tendrils, like fungal roots, wrapped around their legs and connected them to each other through the soil. As Dave approached, they turned as one. Their eyes, once gentle and brown, now held a disturbing gleam, a faint yellow glow that seemed to pulse beneath clouded corneas. He could have sworn he saw intelligence in those eyes, Not deer intelligence, but something else looking out through stolen bodies. In the center of the group of deer, Harris was on his hands and knees, body convulsing as yellow tendrils erupted from his back, connecting him to the infected deer around him. His jacket hung in tatters, revealing skin that pulsed and rippled as something moved beneath it. All around him, the ground was alive with fungal growth, spreading outward like a web. His chest still moved, but the rhythm was wrong, like multiple hearts beating out of sync. His rifle lay beside him, twisted into a pretzel, as if it were made of warm taffy instead of steel. Harris's eyes snapped open, and Dave stumbled backward. The irises had already begun to cloud over with that sickly yellow glow. His mouth opened, jaw distending far beyond what should have been possible, and Dave caught a glimpse of something writhing in his throat, pale tendrils reaching for air. Dave knew, with chilling certainty, that if he stayed any longer, he would share Harris's fate, becoming another vessel for whatever horror was spreading through these woods. Those pale tendrils would burrow into his flesh, remake him from the inside out, until nothing human remained. He turned and ran. Dave didn't tell anyone what he had seen at first. He started drinking heavily, trying to forget that day. But the nightmares wouldn't leave him alone, and neither would the guilt. By the time he finally went to the rangers, his report sounded like the ramblings of a madman. Eyes glowing, deer circling like some kind of ritual. Harris's body twisted up like that? Ranger Kirkland shook his head, dismissing him with a sympathetic pat on the shoulder. Sounds like you've been watching too many horror flicks, Dave. Probably a bear, maybe coyotes. You think I don't know what a damn coyote kill looks like? Dave's voice cracked. I'm telling you, this was something different. The rangers, reluctantly humoring him, sent a small team to the site. When they arrived, the body was gone. Harris's truck still sat at the trailhead, but the clearing Dave described showed no sign of the gruesome scene. Only disturbed snow and faint traces of blood. Maybe scavengers got it, one ranger offered, though the explanation felt hollow. The deer tracks, however, were still there, forming a perfect circle that left the team uneasy. Still, no one took him seriously, not even the hunters who had trusted him for decades. Bills needed paying, and he had 3 hunters booked for opening day. He told himself the whiskey would keep the memories at bay. He was wrong. A week later, as he prepared for the upcoming trip, the memory of Harris's body and the strange circle of deer haunted his every waking moment. Despite his best efforts to convince himself otherwise, he knew something unnatural was stalking the woods. Dave's truck crawled along the logging road, headlights catching glimpses of movement in the tree line. Mike's breath caught as twin reflections flashed yellow in the darkness, too high up for a normal deer, at least 9 feet off the ground. Ray leaned forward from the back seat, hand instinctively reaching for the rifle between his knees. "Did you see that?" Mike asked, voice tight. "Yeah," Dave muttered, gripping the steering wheel harder. "Keep your eyes open, and don't wander off alone while we're out here." Nobody asked why. "Something's spooking the deer this season," David said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Haven't seen normal movement patterns in weeks." He didn't mention the mutated-looking Harris, or the circle of glowing-eyed deer. His hands trembled as he downshifted around a sharp bend. The CB radio crackled to life unprompted. Through bursts of static, they heard what sounded like hooves on wooden floors, followed by wet, tearing sounds and something that might have been screaming. Dave snapped it off, but not before Mike caught fragments of words hidden in the static. Help, and hungry, and run. "Power interference," Dave muttered. Gets weird up here." The cabin appeared through the trees, looking somehow wrong in the gathering dusk. The windows were dark holes, and Mike could have sworn he saw something move behind the glass, something too tall and angular to be human. As they unloaded their gear, a sound split the darkness. Start of a normal deer call that twisted into a wet, gurgling screech. Dave dropped his bag, mumbling about checking the generator. His flashlight beam shook as he rounded the cabin. The beam caught something red and wet dripping from the generator's housing. When he touched it, it was warm and sticky. Fresh blood, but riddled with what looked like yellowish pustules and throbbing veins. He didn't tell the others. Inside, they went through the motions of a normal hunting camp evening. They cleaned their guns and passed a bottle of bourbon, Mike and Ray oblivious to Dave's growing unease. Around midnight, Mike saw it first. A massive buck standing at the edge of the cabin's light. Its head was cocked at an impossible angle, neck twisted nearly backwards. As he watched, frozen, its mouth began to open, splitting its face vertically like a blooming flower. Row after row of writhing fungal tendrils emerged, dripping with the same infected blood Dave had found on the generator. Morning brought heavy fog and the sharp copper stench of blood. They found the first body 50 yards from the cabin. A coyote splayed open from throat to tail, its ribcage pulled apart like wooden gates. Inside, where organs should have been, they found a pulsing mass of infected tissue, threaded through with yellowish veins that seemed to move of their own accord. Fresh deer tracks led away from the corpse, but they seemed wrong, too deep, as if whatever made them had been impossibly heavy. "We should go," Ray said, his voice cracking. "Something's wrong here." But Dave was already walking deeper into the fog, following tracks that led deeper into the forest. He knew what waited in these woods, had known since finding that first mutilated buck 3 weeks ago. The only question was whether they had survived long enough to understand why the deer had changed, why they had started hunting other animals and humans. Dave's footsteps crunched through the fog-laden forest, the sound somehow wrong, too hollow, as if the ground beneath was riddled with cavities. Ray and Mike followed reluctantly, rifles ready, though both men knew something was terribly wrong in these woods. The tracks led them to a clearing where the fog seemed to pull like mercury. The air grew thick with a sickly sweet smell, rot mixed with something metallic, like copper pennies left too long in the sun. Mike gagged, but Ray recognized the scent from Afghanistan. It was the smell of fresh viscera, exposed to open air. "Dave!" Ray called out, voice barely above a whisper. "We need to turn back." But Dave had stopped dead at the clearing's edge. His flashlight beam caught movement. Dozens of deer standing in formation, their bodies wrong in ways that defied explanation. Their limbs had elongated, joints bending backward at impossible angles. Pulsing growths burst through their hides like cancerous tumors, yellow veins spiderwebbing across exposed muscle. Their faces were twisted, jaws distended to reveal endless rows of writhing fungal tendrils that glowed with a sickly inner light. At the center of the formation stood something that had once been a buck. Its massive body towered 12 feet high, muscle and sinew wrapped around a framework of infected tissue that had completely replaced its skeleton. Its antlers had grown wild and twisted, dripping with a yellowish ichor that sizzled when it hit the frozen ground. Mike's nerve broke. He turned to run, and that's when the rest of the herd emerged from the fog behind them. The creatures that had once been deer moved with terrible speed, their infected limbs leaving deep gouges in the frozen earth. Mike managed one shot before they reached him. The rifle's report echoed through the trees, followed by a wet, tearing sound, and Mike's scream, cut suddenly short. Ray grabbed Dave's arm and yanked him toward a fallen log as arterial spray painted the fog red. "Move!" he shouted, military training taking over. But Dave stood transfixed, watching as Mike's body was torn apart by the frenzied creatures. Their fungal tendrils ripped through flesh and bone with horrifying efficiency. The massive buck reared up, hooves the size of dinner plates cratering the earth. Its roar was like nothing natural, a sound that made Dave's teeth vibrate and his vision blur. Ray's rifle barked 3 times, the shots punching chunks of infected meat from the monster's hide. But the wounds seemed to have little effect, yellowish pus oozing from holes that were already starting to seal. "Run!" Ray whispered, shoving Dave hard. This time, Dave's legs obeyed. They crashed through the underbrush as inhuman screams echoed behind them. The sound of pursuit was everywhere, cracking branches, pounding hooves, and that terrible wet squelching of infected flesh. They had almost reached the cabin when Ray's foot caught a root. He went down hard, rifle clattering away into the fog. Dave skidded to a stop, turned back, and saw them. Dozens of glowing eyes in the mist, moving fast. The creatures had herded them here deliberately. The massive buck burst from the fog, its infected body somehow even larger than before. Ray scrambled to his feet, but it was too late. The monster's antlers caught him mid-rise, impaling him through the chest and lifting him into the air. Ray's scream turned to a wet gurgle as the creature shook its head violently, tearing him apart. Dave ran. Behind him, he could hear the herd pursuing, their infected hooves squelching against stone and frozen earth. The cabin was just ahead, but he knew now that walls wouldn't save him. Nothing would save him. These woods belonged to something else now, something that had hollowed out the local deer and turned them into monsters. As he sprinted through the darkness, Dave's mind returned to those first mutilated carcasses he had found. He understood now that they hadn't been kills. They had been metamorphoses. Something had infected the deer, transformed them from the inside out. And now they were hungry, and not for their usual diet of berries and acorns. Now they hunted flesh, human flesh. Dave's boots pounded against frozen earth as he ran, each impact sending shock waves of pain through his exhausted legs. The cabin loomed ahead, a dark rectangle against the starlit sky. He could hear them behind him, the wet squelching of infected hooves, the rattling breath through malformed throats, the sound of branches snapping under the weight of things that used to be deer. The cabin door hung open, swaying slightly in the cold wind. Dave dove through it, slamming it shut behind him and throwing the bolt. His hands shook as he dragged a heavy oak table across the floor, bracing it against the door. Outside, something massive slammed against the cabin wall, making the whole structure shudder. In the dim light filtering through dirty windows, Dave saw one of Ray's rifles lying where he'd left it on the coffee table. He grabbed it, checking the magazine with trembling fingers. 3 rounds left. Better than nothing. A twisted antler punched through the wall beside him, dripping with yellowish pus and trailing infected tissue. Dave stumbled backward, firing twice at the pulsing mass visible through the hole. The shots tore through diseased flesh, doing little more than annoying the creature. It withdrew with a wet, sucking sound, leaving behind a hole that leaked frozen air and the stench of rot. Dave's back hit the kitchen counter. His hand found the satellite phone he'd left there earlier, his last hope for survival. He punched in 911 as another impact rocked the cabin. The phone crackled with static, then went dead. Through its speaker, he heard what sounded like hoofbeats, followed by that wet, squelching sound that would haunt his nightmares if he survived this night. The windows exploded inward simultaneously, showering the room with broken glass. Dave caught glimpses of twisted forms flowing through the openings. Too many limbs, too many angles, infected tissue pulsing with sickly yellow. He fired his last round at the nearest shape and ran for the stairs to the basement. The basement door slammed behind him as he thundered down rotting wooden steps. His flashlight beam caught shelves of canned goods, old hunting gear, and there, a gun safe in the corner. If he could reach it, he might have a chance. The combination was simple. His daughter's birthday. His fingers had just touched the dial when he heard it. That wet, squelching sound coming from the dark corner behind him. Dave turned, flashlight beam cutting through basement shadows. The beam caught movement in the coal chute, a twisted mass of infected flesh forcing its way through an opening barely big enough for a child. As he watched, frozen in horror, the thing's body compressed and flowed like liquid nightmare, yellow pustules bursting as it squeezed through. He abandoned the gun safe and ran for the storm doors leading outside. They were stuck fast, swollen with age and winter moisture. Dave threw his shoulder against them once, twice, hearing the wood creak. Behind him, the thing finished squeezing through the coal chute. His flashlight beam caught it unfolding, limbs snapping back into place, infected tissue pulsing with a ghastly glow. That's when he recognized it, the creature that used to be Harris. The storm doors finally burst open under Dave's third desperate impact. He scrambled through them into the night air, feeling something sharp graze his leg as the basement creature lunged. Blood ran hot down his calf, but adrenaline kept him moving. The woods waited ahead, dark and dense. He knew the deer would be out there, hunting, but staying here meant certain death. Dave plunged into the forest, using decades of hunting experience to navigate by moonlight. His injured leg left a trail of blood. He could hear the creatures sniffing it out behind him. The massive buck's roar echoed through the trees. Closer now. Too close. A fallen tree provided temporary cover. Dave pressed himself against the rotting trunk, trying to control his ragged breathing. Through gaps in the bark, he watched 3 of the creatures stalk past. Their infections had spread further, yellowish veins and pulsing growths bursting through meat and muscle. One turned its head completely backward, jaw unhinging to taste the air with a tongue that writhed like dying worms. The hunting cabin's generator exploded behind him, a sudden flash that illuminated the forest in stark relief. In that moment of harsh light, Dave saw them all, dozens of twisted forms moving through the trees, herding him towards something ahead. Through the branches, he caught glimpses of Miller's Ridge. The same ridge where he had found that circle of deer 3 weeks ago. That same ridge where he saw Harris transforming. Dave turned to run in another direction, but his injured leg buckled. He went down hard, teeth cracking against frozen earth. Before he could rise, something grabbed his ankle. He looked back to see infected tissue erupting from the ground itself, yellowish veins spreading through the soil like corrupt roots. The massive buck emerged from the darkness, its diseased body towering over him. Dave screamed as it lowered its twisted head, rows of writhing fungal tendrils dripping yellow ichor. The last thing he saw was his own reflection, distorted in its clouded, glowing eyes, as the creature's jaw began to open. Dave's world exploded into pain as the infected deer's mouth engulfed his shoulder. But instead of tearing flesh, he felt something worse, a burning sensation as thousands of microscopic filaments pushed into his skin. The massive buck wasn't trying to eat him, it was trying to infect him. Through the haze of agony, Dave's hand found a sharp rock. With the last of his strength, he drove it into the creature's eye. The beast reared back, releasing him with a wet, squelching sound. Yellow ichor sprayed from the wound, splattering across Dave's face and chest. Each droplet felt like acid, sending tendrils of fire through his veins. Somehow, he managed to stumble to his feet. The infection was already spreading. He could feel it crawling through his shoulder, replacing muscle and bone with something alien and wrong. His vision began to shift, colors inverting, the darkness of the forest suddenly alive with pulsing, bioluminescent patterns he'd never noticed before. The other deer had formed a circle around him, but they weren't attacking. They were waiting, watching. Dave realized with horror that he could feel their presence in his mind now, a hive mind of corrupt thoughts and alien hunger. Through their shared consciousness, he began to understand. The infection hadn't started with the deer. They were just vessels, host for something that had slumbered deep beneath Miller's Ridge for centuries. The recent logging operations had disturbed its resting place, a vast underground network of fungal growth that had waited patiently for a chance to spread. The deer had been first because they were plentiful, easy to infect, but they were just the beginning. Through their shared vision, Dave saw the infection's plan, how it would use the deer to spread through hunting season, infecting hunters who would return to their homes and families, carrying the spores to cities and towns across the country. Fighting against the growing connection, Dave fumbled for his pocket. His fingers, already beginning to elongate and twist, closed around his lighter. The infection had spread through his entire left side now, yellow veins pulsing beneath his skin. He could feel his jaw starting to distend, new growths pushing up through his soft palate. But he still had control of his right hand, the hand holding the lighter. "You want to spread?" he growled, voice distorting as his vocal cords transformed. "Try spreading through ashes." Dave flicked the lighter and touched it to his jacket, still soaked in generator fuel from his earlier encounter. Flames exploded across his body. The hive mind screamed in his thoughts, not in pain, but in frustration, as it realized its carefully laid plan was about to be disrupted. The infected deer charged forward, trying to stop him, but Dave was already burning too hot to touch. He ran straight for the massive buck, tackling it with his burning body. The creature's infected flesh caught fire instantly, yellow ichor acting like accelerant. The flames spread through the herd like wildfire, following the network of infected tissue that connected them all. Dave felt a moment of triumph before the pain overwhelmed him. As consciousness faded, he saw the forest catching fire, burning away the infection's groundwork. His last thought was of his daughter, how she would never know that her birthday, the combination to that gun safe he never reached, had given him the strength for this final act. 3 days later, after the forest fire had been contained, Ranger Kirkland led a team through the burned area. They found a massive circle of deer carcasses, charred beyond recognition. At the center lay 2 bodies fused together, one human, one barely recognizable as a deer. Both had been burned down to ash, but as they turned to leave, one ranger noticed something in the ashes. Tiny yellow spores, barely visible, drifting on the wind. And deep beneath the scorched earth of Miller's Ridge, in caves untouched by the fire, something ancient stirred and began to grow again, waiting for its next opportunity to emerge. Welcome, restless souls, to Carman's Crypt. I'm Carman Carrion, keeper of forgotten tales and curator of nightmares. You've wandered into my domain, where each week I unearth a fresh horror from the depths of human imagination. In these darkened halls, stories wait like hungry shadows. Each tale we've collected whispers of terrors both ancient and new. From crumbling mansions where something skitters behind the walls, to that strange text message you received at 3 a.m. from a number that shouldn't exist. So gather close. The candles are lit, the shadows grow long, and the witching hour is upon us. Are you prepared to face what lurks in the darkest recesses of Carman's Crypt? Lock your doors, still your nerves, and remember, here, every fear comes to life. This is Carman's Crypt. Your sanctuary of scares awaits. Mrs. Eleanor Hawkins pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders as the autumn wind rattled the windows of her Victorian boarding house. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 3 times, marking the afternoon hour with solemn precision. She glanced up at the ceiling, listening intently for any sound from the apartment above. Silence, always silence, yet somehow the silence from upstairs felt different than mere emptiness. It felt expectant, watching, a silence that pressed against her eardrums like a physical force. It had been 3 weeks since Mr. James Bennett had rented the upstairs apartment, the same one he and his wife had occupied years ago, before the tragedy. He was a handsome man in his early 40s, with kind eyes that seemed to carry a permanent shadow of melancholy. Eleanor had noticed how his hands trembled slightly when he signed the lease, how his gaze would drift to the ceiling, as if seeing through it to the rooms above. "My wife and I would like to take the upstairs apartment," he had said that day, standing on her doorstep with a single suitcase. No furniture, no boxes of belongings, just one weathered leather suitcase with peeling corners and tarnished brass fixtures. Eleanor had been pleased to have the apartment occupied again after months of vacancy. The previous tenants had left in the middle of the night without explanation, forfeiting their security deposit. Before them, a young couple had stayed only 2 weeks before claiming the place felt wrong. Eleanor had dismissed their complaints as the superstitious nonsense of city folk, unused to the creaks and groans of an old house. "Of course, Mr. Bennett. When will Mrs. Bennett be arriving?" she had asked, noticing how he flinched almost imperceptibly at the question. "Oh, she's just finalizing some arrangements," he had replied, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "She'll be joining me by the end of the week." That night, Eleanor had been woken by the sound of footsteps pacing the floor above her bedroom, back and forth, with a rhythm too measured to be natural, too deliberate. When she had mentioned it to James the next morning, he had looked startled, then quickly composed himself. "I'm sorry to have disturbed you," he had said. "I suffer from insomnia. I'll be more mindful." But Eleanor could have sworn the footsteps she had heard were lighter than his, a woman's tread. That had been 3 weeks ago. Eleanor had never seen Mrs. Bennett, never caught the sound of a woman's laughter or the murmur of conversation between husband and wife. Yet sometimes in the dead of night, she would wake to the sound of what seemed like sobbing from above, a low, mournful keening that made her blood run cold. When she brought up the fresh linens, James always met her at the door, never allowing her to step inside. "Margaret is resting," he would say with a gentle smile that didn't match the haunted look in his eyes. Or, "She's just stepped out for a bit of fresh air." But Eleanor had been watching the building. No woman ever entered or left. Every excuse was plausible. Yet Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Twice now, she had noticed strange water stains forming on her bedroom ceiling, dark, spreading blotches that appeared overnight and dried by morning, leaving no trace. The plumber found no leaks. Then there were the whispers. Standing in the hallway outside the upstairs apartment, Eleanor would sometimes hear a woman's voice, so faint she could never make out the words, but unmistakably feminine. When she pressed her ear to the door, the whispers would stop abruptly, replaced by a heavy silence. Most disturbing of all were the dreams. Since James Bennett had moved in, Eleanor had begun dreaming of a dark-haired woman standing at the foot of her bed, her face obscured by shadows, water dripping from her sodden nightgown onto the floorboards. In the dreams, the woman would slowly raise her arm, pointing toward the ceiling with a pale finger. Her lips would move, but no sound would come out. Eleanor would always wake gasping, her sheets damp with sweat. Today, she decided she would discover the truth. She had prepared a basket of freshly baked scones and tea, a welcome gift for the elusive Mrs. Bennet that could no longer be politely refused. She had also slipped a small silver cross inside her pocket, though she wasn't entirely sure why she felt she needed it. As she climbed the stairs, she noticed for the first time how the temperature seemed to drop with each step, until her breath fogged faintly in the air when she reached the landing. The walls of the narrow hallway seemed to press inward, and Eleanor had the distinct impression that the house itself was holding its breath. Eleanor climbed the stairs slowly, her knees protesting with each step. The wooden staircase creaked beneath her weight, announcing her approach. An odd sensation crawled up her spine, the feeling of being watched from above. When she glanced up, she thought she saw a flicker of movement at the top of the stairs, but when she blinked, nothing was there. When she reached the landing, she paused to catch her breath and straighten her dress before knocking on the door. 3 sharp raps, then silence. The silence was absolute, unnatural. No shuffling of feet, no creak of floorboards. It was as if the entire apartment had been swallowed by a void. "Mr. Bennet," she called out, her voice sounding thin and reedy in the heavy air. "I've brought some afternoon tea for you and Mrs. Bennet." No response came from within the apartment. Eleanor frowned, certain she had seen James return from his morning walk earlier. She knocked again, louder this time. The sound seemed to die as soon as it was made, absorbed by the dense wood. "Mr. Bennet? Are you there?" As she raised her hand to knock a 3rd time, Eleanor noticed something dark seeping from beneath the door. A thin trickle of liquid, black in the shadowy hallway. She bent closer, her heart thumping loudly in her chest. It looked like water, but with a strange viscosity that made it crawl rather than flow across the wooden floor. She jumped back as the door suddenly swung open on its own, revealing James Bennet standing several feet away from the threshold. He wore a rumpled shirt, his hair disheveled as if he had been running his hands through it repeatedly. Behind him, the apartment was shrouded in an unnatural darkness, the curtains drawn against the afternoon sun. "Mrs. Hawkins?" he said, his voice strained. His eyes darted nervously over her shoulder, as if expecting to see someone standing behind her. "This isn't a good time." Eleanor noticed with growing unease that his bare feet were wet, leaving dark footprints on the hardwood floor. She glanced down at the threshold, but the strange liquid she'd seen moments ago had vanished. Eleanor stood her ground, though her instincts screamed at her to turn and flee. "I've brought tea for you and your wife, Mr. Bennet." Her voice quavered slightly. "I haven't had the pleasure of meeting Mrs. Bennet yet, and I thought Margaret isn't feeling well today." He interrupted, not taking the basket she offered. His eyes were bloodshot, ringed with dark circles. Had he always looked so gaunt? "Perhaps another time." Eleanor noticed how his hands trembled violently as he gripped the doorframe, knuckles white with strain. Behind him, she could see into the apartment, impeccably tidy, with 2 teacups set on the table by the window. One appeared untouched. A woman's shawl was draped over one of the chairs, and Eleanor could have sworn it hadn't been there a moment ago. "I understand," she said carefully, fighting to keep her voice steady. But surely a cup of tea might help her feel better. I won't stay long. The lights in the apartment flickered briefly, though the electricity in the rest of the building remained steady. A cold draft swept past Eleanor, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of wet earth and decay. James' expression hardened, his eyes suddenly alert and watchful. That won't be necessary. From somewhere deep within the apartment came a soft thud, like something heavy falling to the floor. James flinched, glancing over his shoulder into the darkness. "Mr. Bennet," Eleanor said, summoning her courage despite the cold dread settling in her stomach. "I must insist on meeting your wife. I've been very patient, but as the landlady of this establishment, I have certain responsibilities." A shadow passed across the wall behind James, too tall and distorted to be his. The temperature in the hallway plummeted further. A look of raw pain crossed his face. "Please, Mrs. Hawkins, not today." His voice dropped to a whisper. "She's not herself today." "Then when?" Eleanor demanded, her patience finally wearing thin despite her growing fear. "It's been 3 weeks, and I haven't heard a single sound from this apartment except for your footsteps. Not a word spoken, not a laugh, not even the sound of water running in the sink. I'm beginning to wonder if Mrs. Bennet exists at all." The moment the words left her mouth, a low, gurgling moan emanated from the darkened bedroom, causing Eleanor to take an involuntary step backward. It wasn't a human sound. It was too hollow, too wet. James seemed to deflate before her eyes, his shoulders sagging as he leaned against the doorframe. Something changed in his expression, the careful mask of normalcy slipping to reveal something desperate and terrified underneath. "She's here," he whispered, his voice cracking. "She's always here. She never leaves." A chill ran down Eleanor's spine, raising goosebumps on her arms. "May I come in, Mr. Bennet?" The words came out almost against her will. After a moment's hesitation, he stepped aside, his movement jerky and unnatural, like a puppet with tangled strings. "She won't like it," he murmured. "But perhaps you can help." The apartment was immaculate, almost unnaturally so, as if no one actually lived there. A vase of fresh flowers sat on the dining room table next to 2 place settings. A woman's robe hung on a hook by the bathroom door, dripping water onto the floor, though there was no evidence it had been recently used. A pair of delicate reading glasses rested on an open book by the armchair, the pages damp and curling. The air inside the apartment was thick and heavy, difficult to breathe. It smelled of mildew and something else, something Eleanor couldn't quite identify, but that made her stomach churn. Stains marked the ceiling in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, but there was no sign of Mrs. Bennet. "Where is your wife?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She clutched her basket tighter, the silver cross in her pocket suddenly feeling very small and inadequate. James moved to the window, gazing out at the autumn leaves swirling in the garden below. The glass was foggy, as if someone had been breathing on it from the inside. Slowly, deliberately, he drew the curtains closed, plunging the room into gloom. The only light now came from a single lamp in the corner, which cast long, distorted shadows across the walls. "Margaret died 5 years ago," he said finally, his voice flat and emotionless. "Right here in this apartment." Eleanor clutched the back of a chair for support. "But you told me—" "I know what I told you," James interrupted, turning to face her with eyes that now seemed hollow, almost black in the dim light. And it wasn't a lie. Not entirely. Something scurried across the floor at the edge of Eleanor's vision. Something small and dark that disappeared beneath the sofa before she could get a proper look. The floorboards beneath her feet felt damp. James guided Eleanor to the corner of the room where a small table held a framed photograph. The glass was cracked, the image beneath water damaged and faded. Still, Eleanor could make out a beautiful young woman with dark hair and what might once have been a gentle smile. Now, in the shadowy light, her expression seemed almost sinister. "She didn't die of an illness, did she, Mr. Bennet?" Eleanor asked, a terrible suspicion forming in her mind. James's hand trembled as he touched the photograph. "There was an accident," he whispered. "The bathtub. I only left her alone for a few minutes. The doctor said she must have fallen, hit her head, drowned. After she died, I couldn't bear to stay. I traveled, tried to outrun the grief, but nothing worked." He looked around the apartment, his expression haunted. "So I came back to where we were happiest." He ran his fingers along the cracked frame. "And when I returned, I found her waiting for me." The bathroom door creaked open slightly on its own, releasing a waft of damp, musty air. Eleanor could hear water dripping steadily from a faucet. "Mr. Bennet," Eleanor said gently, fighting to keep her voice from shaking. "Your wife is gone." "No," he insisted, his voice rising with a manic edge. "She's here. She won't let me forget, won't let me sleep, won't let me leave." He gestured wildly at the apartment. "I can feel her presence, watching me, always watching. Sometimes, when I'm between waking and sleeping, I can see her standing over me, water streaming from her hair, her nightgown plastered to her body. I set out her teacup every morning because she punishes me if I don't. I hang her robe just as she liked it. I keep fresh flowers because they were her favorite." "Punishes you?" Eleanor echoed, her mouth dry with fear. James rolled up his sleeve, revealing deep purple bruises on his arm, bruises in the distinct shape of fingerprints. "She drags me from my bed," he whispered, "tries to pull me into the bathtub. She wants company, you see. She's so lonely." Eleanor felt a mixture of pity and terror for this broken man. "James," she said softly, using his first name. This can't be real. You need help. You need to accept that Margaret is gone." "You don't understand," he said, moving to the center of the room, his eyes fixed on something over Eleanor's shoulder. "She's angry now. You've upset her." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Margaret!" The air in the apartment suddenly felt heavier, colder, pressing against Eleanor's lungs like a physical weight. The lamp flickered and dimmed. Eleanor watched in growing horror as James spoke to the empty air. "Margaret, darling, it's just Mrs. Hawkins. You remember I told you about her. She's been very kind to us. Please don't hurt her." All the moisture seemed to have left Eleanor's mouth. "Mr. Bennet, there's no one." Her words died in her throat as a sound caught her attention, the soft, wet rustle of sodden fabric dragging against the floor from the bedroom. It was accompanied by a faint sloshing noise, like footsteps in standing water, though the floor was now dry. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice cracking. James's face lit up with a mixture of relief and dread. "You heard her? You really heard her?" He backed away from the bedroom door. "She usually only comes out at night." Before Eleanor could respond, the bedroom door creaked open wider. No one emerged, but the temperature plummeted further, their breath now clearly visible in the frigid air. A puddle of dark water began spreading from the doorway, inching across the floor toward Eleanor's feet. The scent that wafted into the room wasn't lavender. It was the unmistakable stench of stagnant water and decay, like a body long submerged. Margaret always loved lavender water, James said, his voice strained, as if trying to convince himself as much as Eleanor. Don't you smell it? She's welcoming you. The floorboards groaned under an invisible weight. Wet footprints appeared in the puddle of water, advancing slowly toward them, small, bare feet that left dark impressions on the wood. She wants to meet you, James whispered, his face ashen. She gets so lonely when I'm gone, so angry. I think that's why the others left. The lights flickered again, more violently this time, and in the momentary darkness, Eleanor thought she glimpsed a figure standing in the bedroom doorway. A woman in a white nightgown, her long, dark hair plastered to her skull, her skin bloated and pale with a bluish tinge. Water streamed from her clothes, her hair, her fingertips, pulling at her feet. When the light stabilized, the doorway was empty again, but the wet footprints had advanced another step. Eleanor felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up as primal terror gripped her. I should go, she said, backing toward the door, the tea basket forgotten on the table. I've intruded enough. Her foot splashed in a puddle that hadn't been there moments ago. The water was ice cold and oddly viscous. Please don't, James pleaded, a note of panic in his voice. Not now, not when she's finally letting someone else know she's here. It's been so lonely being the only one who knows. His eyes darted frantically between Eleanor and the advancing footprints. Besides, she won't let you leave now that she knows you can see her. As if to confirm his words, the front door suddenly slammed shut on its own. The lock turned with a definitive click. Eleanor glanced toward the bedroom door, which now stood halfway open. The darkness beyond seemed absolute, unnatural, a void rather than merely an unlit room. The wet footprints stopped just a few feet away from her, as if their owner was standing there, invisible yet present. Mr. Bennett, she said carefully, her voice shaking. I don't know what's happening here, but I think you should speak with someone. A doctor, perhaps. And I need to leave, now. She fumbled in her pocket for the silver cross. James's expression darkened. You think I'm mad? His laugh was hollow, edged with hysteria. I thought so too at first. Kept telling myself it was grief, imagination, until she touched me. I think you're grieving, Eleanor corrected, trying to edge around the invisible presence to reach the door. And grief can play tricks on the mind. It's not a trick, he insisted, his voice rising. Margaret, please. Show her you're real. Show her what you show me every night. The temperature dropped so severely that Eleanor's breath formed crystalline clouds in the air. The puddle at her feet began to freeze, crackling as it spread further across the floor. The bedroom door swung open fully with a violent bang. Beyond it lay the bedroom, but Eleanor could see a bathroom through a doorway on the far side. The clawfoot bathtub visible and filled to the brim with dark water, which sloshed gently against the side, as if disturbed by some unseen movement beneath the surface. Standing between Eleanor and the bedroom was a figure that hadn't been there a second ago. A woman in a nightgown that might once have been white, but was now stained a murky gray-green. Her back was to them, her long dark hair hanging in wet ropes down to her waist. water pooling around her bare feet. Her head was tilted at an unnatural angle. James whimpered, pressing himself against the wall. "She's here," he whispered. "Do you see her now?" Slowly, with jerky, unnatural movements, the figure began to turn. "Don't look at her face," James suddenly screamed. "For God's sake, don't look at her face!" Eleanor couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't tear her eyes away as the woman's head rotated further than humanly possible. Her waterlogged face came into view, bloated, the skin sloughing off in places to reveal the darkness beneath. Her eyes were cloudy and bulging, fixed in a terrible stare. Her blue-tinged lips drew back in what might have been a smile, revealing blackened teeth and a swollen tongue. Water streamed continuously from her mouth as she opened it wider than any human mouth should open, her jaw dislocating with a sickening crack. Eleanor backed away until she hit the door, her hand frantically searching for the knob. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Oh my God." With desperate strength, born of terror, Eleanor ripped her arm free and fumbled with the door handle, yanking it open. Behind her, James shouted something unintelligible, his voice drowned out by a deafening roar like a burst dam. Water began pouring from the walls, the ceiling, bubbling up between the floorboards. Eleanor staggered into the hallway, slamming the door behind her. She could hear James screaming on the other side, the sound quickly cut off by a gurgling splash. Water began seeping beneath the door, dark and foul-smelling. She nearly fell down the stairs in her haste, her wet shoes slipping on the wooden steps. Behind her, she heard the door creak open, hinges protesting against the pressure of the water now flowing freely from the apartment. Reaching the bottom landing, Eleanor turned back to see a torrent of black water cascading down the stairs. At the top of the staircase stood the spectral woman, her bloated face now twisted in rage, water streaming from her gaping mouth like a macabre fountain. In her grotesquely elongated arms, she clutched James Bennett's limp form, his head lolling at an unnatural angle, face blue and eyes bulging in death. "Margaret?" Eleanor whispered, the name escaping her lips unbidden. The ghost's dead eyes locked onto hers. The apparition's smile, a terrible knowing grin that split her face almost in half before retreating back into the darkness of the upstairs hallway, dragging James's body with her. With a final surge, the water rushed down the stairs, and Eleanor fled through the front door into the gathering dusk. She ran back to her own quarters, locking herself inside with trembling hands. She secured each bolt, then collapsed into her armchair, pulling a blanket around her shoulders, despite the warmth of the fire. As the night progressed, Eleanor noticed a dark stain forming on her ceiling, spreading outward like an ink blot. She watched in horror as water began to seep through, first in drops, then in steady streams. The wooden beams groaned under increasing pressure. Suddenly, with a deafening crack, the ceiling collapsed. Among the debris and gushing water, something fell into her living room. A woman's body, bloated and partially decomposed, wearing a white nightgown. Eleanor stared at Margaret Bennett's face, preserved yet distorted by water damage. The woman's hair hung in wet ropes, her skin bloated with a bluish tinge, just as Eleanor had seen in her vision upstairs. The next day, police investigators arrived to take her statement. They told her that James Bennett's body had been discovered in the river 5 years ago, shortly after his wife went missing. They revealed that Margaret's disappearance had been treated as a potential homicide, but without a body, the case had gone cold. Until now, the detective said grimly, looking at the broken ceiling where Margaret's remains had been concealed all these years. Eleanor now understood the truth, that James had murdered his wife, hidden her body in the space between floors, and then taken his own life, consumed by guilt. Yet somehow, both of their spirits remained trapped in the house, doomed to reenact their tragedy. Eleanor Hawkins never rented the upstairs apartment again. She had the door sealed up, the staircase blocked off. But sometimes, late at night, she would still hear footsteps on the upstairs floor, a man's heavy tread, followed by a woman's lighter step, and sometimes the patter of what sounds like water dripping from soaked clothing onto hardwood floors. Those who have stayed in the boarding house long enough know not to investigate these sounds. They know to keep their doors locked at night, to never answer if they hear knocking after dark. And they know, above all else, never to ask about the couple who sometimes appear in the hallway mirror, a gaunt man with hollow eyes, and behind him, a woman with long dark hair and a gentle smile that never quite reaches her eyes. And so, dear listeners, we emerge from another dark corner of Carman's Crypt. But remember, the horrors you've heard tonight are merely echoes of the terrors that await in the shadows of your own mind. If you enjoyed your stay in the crypt, why not invite a friend to join us next week? After all, fear is best when shared. Leave a review if you dare, or share your own tales of terror on my social media. Who knows, your nightmares might just become my next story. Until next time, keep checking under your bed. And remember, in Carman's Crypt, every fear comes alive, and no one is truly safe. Sweet dreams, if you can still sleep at all.